Hey guys, tonight we wander slowly into ancient Rome just as the first pale light crawls across the seven hills and turns the city from a dark lump of sleeping stone into a restless machine of smoke, sandals, and shouting. You stand outside the city walls with dust already clinging to your ankles, listening to mule carts creak over uneven roads, while somewhere ahead a baker slaps dough against a wooden table hard enough to sound like a minor legal dispute. The air smells oddly layered: fresh bread, olive oil, damp wool, horse manure, and the unmistakable perfume of several thousand people who absolutely do not own deodorant. You probably won't survive this without at least one stomach illness and a light emotional breakdown, but honestly, that just makes the experience more authentic. If you want to see more new videos, please like and subscribe to the channel. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you settle in tonight, post your location and local time down below. I always love seeing where in the world people are listening from while we drift through history together. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You move with the morning crowd through the gates of Rome, and immediately the city feels louder than it has any right to be before sunrise. Sandaled feet slap stone, vendors drag open wooden shutters. Somewhere nearby, a donkey complains to the universe with impressive commitment. Rome in this era holds perhaps 1 million people at its peak, making it one of the largest cities on Earth, and you feel every single one of them apparently deciding to wake up at the exact same moment.
The streets twist unpredictably, narrow enough in places that upper floors nearly touch overhead. Laundry hangs between buildings like surrender flags. You step carefully because the roads are uneven, and because chamber pots occasionally empty from upper windows with only a brief warning shout. Historians still argue whether Romans truly yelled specific phrases before dumping waste, or whether later writers exaggerated the practice to entertain readers. Either way, you instinctively hug the walls a little less. A woman passes carrying figs in a woven basket balanced perfectly on her head. 2 boys sprint past chasing a dog that looks deeply offended by the entire arrangement. Near a corner shrine, an old man burns incense before a tiny household god while muttering prayers for luck, health, and probably lower rent. The strange thing is how alive everything feels already. Rome does not wake gently, it lunges awake. You pause near a bakery where flack loaves cool on wooden shelves. Roman bread often carries stamps identifying the baker, almost like ancient branding. Somewhere in the future, an archaeologist will stare at one of these loaves preserved by volcanic ash and think, amazing, humanity really has always loved carbs. Inside, slaves grind grain with heavy stone mills powered by donkeys walking endless circles. Flour dust hangs in the air like pale fog. The baker himself wipes sweat from his brow and complains loudly about grain prices, proving that some conversational topics truly are eternal. Further ahead, you hear water splashing through lead pipes into a public fountain. Rome's aqueduct system is one of the marvels of the ancient Orient, carrying water across astonishing distances through careful engineering and gravity alone. Fresh water flows constantly into the city, though fresh becomes a flexible concept once you notice several people rinsing vegetables, sandals, and possibly a chicken in the exact same basin. You kneel for a drink anyway. Honestly, your immune system is about to become either legendary or non-existent. As the sun rises higher, the marble temples catch warm golden light. Their columns glow softly against the dusty streets. Priests in white-bordered togas move toward morning rituals, while shopkeepers arrange goods outside cramped storefronts. One merchant displays tiny glass perfume bottles imported from the eastern provinces. Another sells garum, the famous fermented fish sauce beloved by Romans and feared by everyone standing downwind. The smell arrives before the shop does.
The streets twist unpredictably, narrow enough in places that upper floors nearly touch overhead. Laundry hangs between buildings like surrender flags. You step carefully because the roads are uneven, and because chamber pots occasionally empty from upper windows with only a brief warning shout. Historians still argue whether Romans truly yelled specific phrases before dumping waste, or whether later writers exaggerated the practice to entertain readers. Either way, you instinctively hug the walls a little less. A woman passes carrying figs in a woven basket balanced perfectly on her head. 2 boys sprint past chasing a dog that looks deeply offended by the entire arrangement. Near a corner shrine, an old man burns incense before a tiny household god while muttering prayers for luck, health, and probably lower rent. The strange thing is how alive everything feels already. Rome does not wake gently, it lunges awake. You pause near a bakery where flat loaves cool on wooden shelves. Roman bread often carries stamps identifying the baker, almost like ancient branding. Somewhere in the future, an archaeologist will stare at one of these loaves preserved by volcanic ash and think, amazing, humanity really has always loved carbs. Inside, slaves grind grain with heavy stone mills powered by donkeys walking endless circles. Flour dust hangs in the air like pale fog. The baker himself wipes sweat from his brow and complains loudly about grain prices, proving that some conversational topics truly are eternal. Further ahead, you hear water splashing through lead pipes into a public fountain. Rome's aqueduct system is one of the marvels of the ancient world, carrying water across astonishing distances through careful engineering and gravity alone. Fresh water flows constantly into the city, though fresh becomes a flexible concept once you notice several people rinsing vegetables, sandals, and possibly a chicken in the exact same basin. You kneel for a drink anyway. Honestly, your immune system is about to become either legendary or non-existent. As the sun rises higher, the marble temples catch warm golden light. Their columns glow softly against the dusty streets. Priests in white-bordered togas move toward morning rituals, while shopkeepers arrange goods outside cramped storefronts. One merchant displays tiny glass perfume bottles imported from the eastern provinces. Another sells garum, the famous fermented fish sauce beloved by Romans and feared by everyone standing downwind. The smell arrives before the shop does.
The closer you get to the Forum, the more the streets seem to funnel human noise directly into your skull. Sandals scrape over stone in every direction. Voices bounce between buildings. Somebody argues passionately about onions. Another man appears to be arguing with a pigeon, which, to be fair, does look unusually confident. You emerge at last into the open space of the Roman Forum itself, and suddenly the city spreads around you in marble, dust, banners, and movement. This is the center of public life in ancient Rome, where laws are announced, deals are struck, speeches are delivered, and reputations are built or ruined before lunch. Temples rise beside government buildings. Statues of generals stare sternly into the distance, as though personally disappointed in everyone nearby. And everywhere, absolutely everywhere, there are people. Citizens in bright-edged togas push through crowds with practiced impatience. Slaves carry baskets, scrolls, stools, wine jugs, and once, rather alarmingly, a live goose tucked under one arm. Merchants shout over each other from temporary stalls. Beggars sit beside columns with hands outstretched. You spot a philosopher lecturing a tiny audience with such dramatic gestures that he nearly smacks a passing mule. The Forum smells different from the outer streets. Here, the scents mix into something warmer and heavier, incense smoke drifting from temples, hot bread from nearby vendors, sweat baking under the growing sun, crushed herbs, olive oil, wet stone, and faint animal musk from livestock being driven through the edges of the square. Rome has many aromas. Few of them could reasonably be called refreshing. You step carefully around a puddle that you sincerely hope is water. Near the center of the Forum, a crowd gathers around a speaker standing atop the rostra, the famous speaking platform decorated with captured enemy ship prows. Public speeches are serious business here. Roman politicians cultivate booming voices, sweeping gestures, and facial expressions dramatic enough to survive without microphones. Today's speaker is denouncing corruption with enormous confidence, which in Rome is a little like a raccoon criticizing trash etiquette. The crowd reacts instantly. Cheers, boos, applause, laughter. Political life in Rome is intensely public. Citizens debate constantly in streets, baths, markets, and taverns. Mainstream historians note that public rhetoric shaped Roman identity deeply. Being persuasive could launch careers and reshape alliances. Historians still argue whether ordinary citizens genuinely influenced policy through these public gatherings, or whether elite families controlled most outcomes behind closed doors anyway.
Probably a bit of both. You edge past a group of scribes seated at small tables beneath awnings. They write letters for illiterate citizens, scratching ink carefully across wax tablets and papyrus scrolls. One clerk looks exhausted already, despite the day barely beginning. His expression says he has copied the phrase "urgent legal matter" at least 40 times this week. A pair of senators glide nearby in dazzling white togas bordered with purple stripes. Their clothing alone costs more than many Romans earn in months. People subtly make space for them, though one senator immediately trips on uneven pavement and mutters something deeply unphilosophical under his breath. Even Rome's elite cannot defeat cobblestones. At the edge of the square, small shrines flicker with candlelight and offerings. Religion here blends seamlessly into daily life. Romans pray before business deals, military campaigns, journeys, meals, and political meetings. Tiny statues of household gods appear everywhere. Some people carry lucky charms shaped like tiny phalluses, believed to ward off evil. Ancient Rome, for all its marble dignity, also spends a surprising amount of time hanging magical penises over doorways for protection. Humanity truly contains multitudes. You pause beside the Temple of Saturn, where the state treasury is stored. Its towering columns cast long strips of shade across the square. Nearby, moneylenders sit behind tables stacked with coins from across the empire, Roman denarii beside Greek drachmas, and foreign currency from lands stretching far beyond the Mediterranean. Rome's power reaches astonishing distances now. Grain arrives from Egypt, marble from Greece, spices from India. Silk from China travels through complicated trade routes across deserts and mountains before eventually landing in wealthy Roman homes. You stand at the center of an interconnected world, though most people nearby are still mainly worried about taxes and whether fish prices will rise again. A sudden commotion erupts near a fountain. Two men are shouting at each other while an increasingly entertained crowd gathers around them. You catch fragments about unpaid debts and an allegedly stolen goat. The goat itself is nowhere visible, which somehow makes the argument feel even more Roman. One man throws up his hands dramatically enough to nearly lose a sandal. Nobody intervenes. Public entertainment is public entertainment. You wander onward beneath statues and triumphal arches while sunlight intensifies overhead. The marble glare grows almost blinding now. Heat settles slowly across the square. Vendors sell watered wine and olives from clay bowls. A boy carrying honey cakes weaves expertly through traffic without colliding with anyone, a skill worthy of military recognition. Then the bells of a nearby temple ring softly through the forum. For a brief moment, the noise shifts, conversations dip, pigeons scatter upward into the blue morning sky. Priests emerge carrying incense burners that trail ribbons of fragrant smoke into the warming air. And standing there among the drifting haze, watching Rome pulse around you with endless confidence and endless exhaustion, you begin to understand something strange about this city. It is both magnificent and deeply messy at exactly the same time, which honestly may be the secret ingredient behind most empires.
By late morning, the heat settles over Rome like a heavy wool blanket somebody forgot to wash. The forum behind you still roars with business and arguments, but your path now follows narrower streets lined with painted signs pointing toward one of the city's greatest obsessions, the baths. Not baths in the modern sense, where you light a candle, soak quietly, and pretend your email inbox does not exist. Roman baths are more like gigantic social engines wrapped in marble and steam. People come here to wash, yes, but also to gossip, flirt, negotiate business deals, exercise, read poetry, and loudly judge strangers. Mostly the judging. The entrance hall buzzes with activity as you arrive. Slaves collect sandals and folded clothing, while attendants shout instructions over the crowd. Men stroll past carrying tiny oil flasks and curved metal scrapers called strigils. Instead of soap, Romans coat themselves in olive oil and scrape away dirt afterward. Effective? Maybe. Deliciously seasoned? Also maybe. You pay a small fee and move deeper into the bath complex, where cool stone floors echo beneath hundreds of footsteps. Sunlight pours through high windows, illuminating drifting steam. Mosaics decorate the walls. Sea creatures, dolphins, tridents, gods riding chariots through waves. Somewhere nearby, water splashes continuously in great pools fed by aqueducts that never seem to stop flowing. The scale of it all feels almost unreal. Mainstream historians consider Roman bathhouses one of the empire's defining social institutions. Some complexes are enormous enough to contain gardens, libraries, gyms, snack stalls, and lecture rooms. In a world without modern plumbing in most homes, baths also provide ordinary Romans with something astonishingly rare: regular access to heated water. And regular access to overhearing everyone else's terrible opinions. You enter the apoditerium, the changing room, where citizens lounge on benches while slaves guard piles of clothing. Or at least theoretically guard them. Theft happens constantly here. A nervous man beside you keeps glancing toward his sandals as though they are treasured family heirlooms. Honestly, fair enough. You continue into the tepidarium, the warm room. Heat wraps around you immediately, soft and humid. Conversations murmur from every corner. A group of merchants debates grain shipments from Egypt, while one old veteran loudly explains how he personally could have conquered Germania if certain idiots have listened to him. No one asks who the idiots are. You suspect he has a prepared list. Steam beads along the marble walls. The air smells faintly of olive oil, wet stone, herbs, and human sweat. Not unpleasant exactly, just undeniably human. A young attendant offers scented oils infused with rose petals and lavender. Romans adore perfumes and cosmetics. Some women use chalk to whiten skin, while others apply crushed beetles or minerals as makeup. There are even bizarre beauty treatments involving
crocodile dung, because apparently somebody looked at a crocodile one day and thought, yes, that creature definitely understands skincare. Remember that if modern wellness culture ever feels too weird. In the hotter caldarium, visibility drops behind thick clouds of steam. Bronze braziers glow red beneath the floors, heating the rooms through an ingenious system called hypocausts. Slaves maintain these furnaces endlessly, feeding wood into roaring fires beneath the building itself. The engineering here is genuinely remarkable. Rome masters infrastructure with the same enthusiasm most people reserve for sports teams. You sink slowly into a heated pool, while nearby conversations drift lazily through the haze. A politician whispers to a wealthy landowner. Two teenagers laugh uncontrollably after splashing each other. Somebody snores softly in a corner. And everywhere, gossip moves faster than water through pipes. A man nearby claims the emperor plans massive new construction projects. Another insists a famous gladiator secretly escaped the arena years ago and now runs a vineyard somewhere near Naples. Historians still argue whether many popular Roman urban legends reflected genuine public anxieties or simply spread because bored humans love dramatic nonsense. Probably the second one. Humanity has always adored rumors. You notice strange little details the longer you linger. Tiny bronze charms hanging from necklaces, tattoo marks on certain slaves, scarred soldiers relaxing beside wealthy merchants. Rome's rigid social hierarchy softens slightly here in the baths, though never completely. Status still matters. Wealth still matters. But steam blurs edges. A physician moves through the room offering medical advice to anyone willing to listen. Roman medicine combines impressive anatomical observations with deeply questionable theories involving bodily humors. One treatment recommendation involves cabbage. Another appears to involve eels. You decide not to ask follow-up questions. Eventually, you wander into the frigidarium, where cold pools gleam beneath vaulted ceilings. The plunge into icy water shocks every thought from your head. Nearby bathers yelp dramatically. One older man emerges from the pool wheezing like a haunted accordion, but insists the experience is invigorating. The Romans really do enjoy suffering recreationally.
Afterward, you recline beside the edge of the baths while attendants scrape oil from your skin with curved strigils. Outside, afternoon sunlight burns bright against the streets of Rome. Through open archways, you glimpse traffic still flowing endlessly beyond the bath complex. Carts rattling, citizens hurrying, vendors shouting. The city never truly rests. But here, for a little while, Rome exhales. Steam curls upward into shafts of golden light. Water ripples softly against marble edges. Voices lower into sleepy murmurs. And you sit among senators, laborers, gamblers, soldiers, and travelers alike, all temporarily melted into the same drifting cloud of warmth and exhaustion. Not equal exactly, but close enough for one quiet afternoon.
When you finally leave the baths, your skin still warm from steam and your hair carrying the faint scent of olive oil, the city outside feels louder somehow, as though Rome spent the entire afternoon storing up noise specifically for your return. The sun hangs high above the rooftops now, glaring down on streets crowded with midday traffic. Vendors shout over one another with the desperate intensity of people who have exactly 1 hour left to sell questionable seafood. Donkeys haul carts piled with amphorae. Children dart through gaps in the crowd like professionally trained thieves in miniature tunics. You follow the smell before you even realize where you are going. The market. At first it arrives in fragments: fresh herbs, onions, warm bread, fish brine, smoke from cooking fires. Then the streets widen, and suddenly the whole marketplace unfolds before you in chaotic layers of color, sound, and movement. This is Rome's stomach. Wooden stalls crowd together beneath cloth awnings that flap lazily in the heat. Olive jars line tables in neat rows. Baskets overflow with figs, dates, beans, cabbages, garlic, and grapes beginning to soften in the sun. Chickens squawk indignantly from wicker cages, while butchers hack meat beneath buzzing clouds of flies that seem alarmingly committed to customer service. You edge sideways to avoid a fishmonger flinging seawater from a barrel directly into the street. Too late. Your sandal now squishes slightly when you walk, which honestly feels like an authentic Roman milestone. Mainstream historians know a great deal about Roman diet from surviving texts, mosaics, and even preserved food remains. Ordinary citizens rely heavily on bread, olives, legumes, and porridge, while wealthier Romans indulge in imported delicacies from across the empire. The gap between rich and poor appears clearly in food. One family eats oysters and peacock tongues beneath painted ceilings. Another stretches lentils across 3 meals and calls it a successful week.
You pause at a baker's stall, where flat, round loaves cool beside trays of honey cakes dusted with poppy seeds. Nearby, a vendor pours steaming chickpea stew into rough clay bowls for laborers eating on the move. Roman street food is surprisingly common. Many apartments lack proper kitchens, so ordinary people often buy meals from food stalls called thermopolia. Think ancient fast food, except with more olives and a significantly higher chance of food poisoning. A wiry merchant waves you toward his spice display with theatrical enthusiasm. Tiny piles of pepper, cumin, coriander, saffron, and cinnamon sit in shallow dishes like powdered treasure. Spices travel enormous distances to reach Rome, crossing deserts and seas through vast trade networks. Pepper becomes so prized that wealthy Romans practically sprinkle it onto meals as a flex. Nothing says I'm successful quite like aggressively seasoning your eggs with imported luxury goods. You drift deeper into the market, where fishmongers dominate one crowded corner. Tuna hang from hooks beside eels twisting lazily in shallow basins. Octopus glistens on crushed ice hauled down from mountain storage pits. The smell grows stronger here. Salt, seaweed, scales, and something ominously fermented. If you want to get lost in more forgotten corners of history, join our village and subscribe. Ah yes, garum territory. Huge ceramic vats of the famous fish sauce stand beneath shaded awnings, while workers ladle thick brown liquid into smaller containers for customers. Romans pour garum over nearly everything. Recipes survive describing sauces mixed with wine, herbs, vinegar, and honey. Historians still argue whether garum tasted pleasantly savory like modern fish sauce, or whether ancient Romans simply possessed taste buds forged in battle. A nearby customer samples some enthusiastically and nods with visible satisfaction, so perhaps the answer is both. Further along, livestock crowds another section of the market. Goats bleat miserably beside sheep and pigs, while buyers inspect animals with serious expressions, normally reserved for military planning. One particularly stubborn goose escapes a crate and sprints through the crowd, pursued by 3 furious children and one exhausted old man. No one seems especially surprised.
You pass beneath hanging strips of dyed fabrics fluttering overhead like bright sails. Roman clothing varies wildly, depending on wealth and status. Laborers wear simple tunics. Senators display expensive white togas bordered in purple. Women pin elaborate hairstyles into towering arrangements using bone needles, ribbons, and enough hair oil to lubricate a small cart axle. A fashionable woman glides by, attended by 2 servants carrying perfume jars. Another citizen nearby scratches himself openly while eating garlic sausage with alarming intensity. Rome contains every level of elegance simultaneously. Near the center of the marketplace, entertainers gather small audiences. A storyteller recites exaggerated tales of heroes and monsters, while a musician plucks notes from a lyre. Beside them, a snake charmer attempts to appear mystical, despite his snake looking profoundly sleepy. You stop briefly near a fortune teller, seated beside tiny carved charms and animal bones.
She studies your palm with narrowed eyes and declares that you will soon take a long journey and encounter danger. Honestly, that prediction in ancient Rome is about as risky as forecasting that water might continue being let. Still, you hand over a coin. The afternoon heat thickens steadily now. Sweat gathers beneath tunics. Merchants fan themselves lazily between customers. Somewhere nearby, somebody drops a basket of figs and immediately begins yelling accusations at the universe. And through it all, the market continues moving like a living organism, buying, selling, bargaining, arguing, laughing. Rome feeds itself here, not gracefully, not cleanly, but constantly. As you leave the crowded stalls behind, carrying the lingering scent of herbs and fish brine with you into the narrowing streets again, the sunlight begins softening toward evening gold. Above the city, smoke rises slowly into the warm sky. And somewhere ahead, beyond the noise and crowded markets, ordinary Romans are climbing home.
The streets begin their slow transformation as afternoon tilts toward evening. The harsh glare softens into honeyed light that stretches long shadows between buildings, turning Rome into a city of angled silhouettes and flickering dust motes. The chaos does not disappear, it simply changes texture, like a drumbeat shifting into something slower but no less persistent. You follow a narrow road climbing upward, away from the densest crowds. Here, the city reveals a different face, less monumental, more intimate. Laundry lines sway between upper floors, children shout from balconies. Someone is loudly arguing about rent in a language that somehow makes anger sound like punctuation. You reach a steep stairwell carved between tall apartment blocks known as insulae. These buildings rise several stories high, packed tightly with residents. Wealthier Romans live closer to the ground. The higher you climb, the poorer the residents tend to be, and the more the architecture begins to feel like a careful experiment in how many people can safely coexist above a single bakery before structural optimism fails. You start climbing. Each step creaks slightly underfoot. The walls narrow. The air warms again, trapped between stone and timber. A faint smell of cooking oil drifts downward, mixed with smoke and laundry drying in cramped spaces. Somewhere above, someone is playing a reed flute badly but with great confidence. Mainstream historians note that Roman urban housing was densely packed and often precarious. Fires and collapses were real concerns, especially in older districts where wood construction still dominated. Some insulae even acquired constant repairs, and tenants lived with the quiet understanding that gravity was not always their landlord's priority. Halfway up, you pause to catch your breath and notice a small shrine tucked into a corner landing. A tiny figurine of a household spirit sits beside a flickering oil lamp, surrounded by offerings, a coin, a fragment of bread, a dried flower. Even in cramped, noisy spaces like this, Romans carve out room for protection, hope, and routine devotion. Religion here is not distant, it is embedded into walls, doorways, staircases, daily habits. You continue upward. A boy rushes past you carrying a jug of water, nearly colliding with your shoulder before vanishing into an open doorway. A woman leans out of another window shaking a cloth and yelling something that sounds like either a greeting or a threat depending entirely on tone. At the third landing, you pass a small group gathered around a dice skin. Wooden cubes clatter against a makeshift table. Coins exchange hands quickly. Laughter bursts out, sharp and sudden. Gambling is common in Rome despite periodic attempts by authorities to regulate or discourage
it. Historians still argue whether these restrictions were genuine moral efforts or simply public gestures that everyone politely ignored. Probably the latter. Rome has a complicated relationship with rules and a very enthusiastic relationship with breaking them. Finally, you reach a higher level where the stairwell opens into a narrow corridor of apartments. Doors stand partially open, revealing dim interiors lit by oil lamps. Inside, families prepare evening meals: bread, stew, lentils, sometimes fish if luck or income allows it. Conversations drift into the hallway, tired voices discussing work, taxes, neighbors, and the ongoing mystery of why everything costs slightly more than last week. You pause near an open doorway. Inside, a family sits around a low table. A father removes his sandals, sighing deeply in relief. A child carefully tears bread into smaller pieces, as if performing a sacred ritual. A woman stirs a pot over a small brazier, the glow of firelight reflecting off clay walls. It is ordinary life, in a city that often feels anything but ordinary. And yet, it is the backbone of Rome.
Outside, the empire is built on legions, senators, roads, and monuments. But here it is built on meals like this, on small rooms stacked above one another, on exhausted workers returning home, on routines repeated until they become invisible. You continue down the corridor until you find a small opening that leads onto a rooftop terrace. And suddenly, the entire city opens before you. Rome stretches outward in layers, rooftops rising and falling like waves frozen mid-motion. Smoke curls from chimneys in thin gray threads. The golden light of sunset washes across marble columns in the distance. The Forum is now partially hidden, but its presence still anchors the skyline. Temples glow softly like embers scattered across the hills. From here, the city looks almost calm. Almost. You hear distant shouting, laughter, the faint echo of markets winding down. Somewhere far below, a cartwheel breaks and someone curses loudly enough to be heard across 3 alleys. A dog barks at nothing in particular, possibly philosophy. Historians still argue whether ancient Romans experienced a sense of urban overwhelm similar to modern city dwellers, or whether constant exposure simply normalized chaos. Standing here, watching thousands of lives unfold beneath a fading sky, you suspect both interpretations are true at once. Rome is overwhelming, and also strangely familiar. The sun dips lower, dragging orange and violet across the horizon. The rooftops begin to glow in warm tones. Lanterns flicker to life one by one across windows and doorways. The city does not sleep, but it begins to shift into its evening personality. Slower, heavier, more reflective. You lean against the terrace wall. For a moment, everything feels suspended. Not peaceful exactly, but steady, like the city itself is inhaling, preparing for the night ahead. And somewhere below, the heartbeat of Rome continues, softened now, but never stopping.
The terrace grows quieter as Rome settles into its evening rhythm, and the noise below becomes less like a roar and more like a distant tide. You stay where you are for a while, letting the last warmth of the day cling to the stone beneath your hands. The rooftops no longer feel chaotic from up here. They feel layered, almost gentle, as lanterns begin to blink awake one by one across the city, like scattered embers refusing to go out. Somewhere far off, a flute plays a slow, uneven melody, not good, but persistent. Cooking smoke drifts upward in thin ribbons, carrying the smell of bread crusts, stews, and olive oil softened by heat. The air cools against your skin in small increments, and you notice how Rome always seems to exhale at this hour, never fully resting, but loosening its grip just slightly. Down in the streets, voices fade into softer patterns. Arguments lose their sharp edges. Even the sharper sounds, the carts, the shouting, the hurried footsteps, begin to stretch and dissolve into distance. You can still feel the city alive beneath everything, but it no longer presses in quite so hard. It becomes something you can observe instead of something that overwhelms you. Historians still argue whether ancient Romans experienced moments of collective quiet like this, or whether their cities simply layered noise upon noise until silence stopped being meaningful. Standing here, it feels less like silence exists at all, and more like Rome simply changes volume when it chooses to. A breeze moves across the rooftops, carrying the faint scent of water from distant fountains and the softer smell of dusk settling into stone. For a moment, everything feels suspended in balance, light fading, sound thinning, movement slowing into a kind of shared breath. And in that space between day and night, the city feels less like a place you are passing through, and more like something that is quietly, endlessly continuing without you. You slip into Rome after midnight, like you're entering a different city wearing the same stone skin.
The daytime roar is gone. Not softened, gone. What replaces it is something stranger. Space. Actual, noticeable space between sounds, between footsteps, between thoughts. The streets that felt impossibly tight in the morning now feel stretched, like the city has been gently pulled apart while nobody was watching. You walk through a gate that no longer feels guarded so much as tired. The watchman leans against a post, half awake, pretending your existence is either irrelevant or already approved. Historians still argue whether Rome's night security was genuinely organized or largely improvised by exhausted men with spears and low expectations. Standing here, you suspect both theories are correct, depending on the district.
The cobblestones are cooler now. Your footsteps sound louder than they should, each step bouncing off empty walls and disappearing into alleys that swallow noise instead of returning it. Somewhere far away, a dog barks once, just once, and then decides the universe is not worth further commentary. Oil lamps hang at intervals along the street, their flames trembling in small glass or clay holders. They don't fully illuminate anything. Instead, they create islands of light surrounded by thick pools of shadow. In those shadows, buildings lose definition, corners become suggestions, doorways feel like questions nobody wants to answer after dark. You pass an apartment block in Insula, its upper floors dark except for a single window where someone is still awake. A faint orange glow leaks out. Maybe a worker finishing late tasks, maybe someone simply unable to sleep. Rome at night has a way of collecting all the people who don't fit neatly into daytime schedules. A soft sound drifts from above, a lute or lyre, played badly but earnestly. The melody doesn't repeat correctly, like the musician keeps forgetting what comes next and deciding that improvisation is a valid philosophy. You continue deeper. The air changes as you move away from the main roads, less dust, more damp stone. A faint smell of extinguished fires lingers, wood smoke that has cooled into memory rather than warmth. Occasionally you pass small household shrines tucked into wall niches, their tiny lamps still burning. Even in darkness, Rome refuses to turn fully off. A small group of men crosses the intersection ahead. They don't speak loudly. They don't need to. Their presence does the talking, cloaks pulled tight, hands near belts, eyes scanning without stopping. Night travel in Rome is always a negotiation between confidence and vulnerability. They pass you without incident. You realize slightly later that you had been holding your breath. Historians still argue whether Roman cities were more dangerous at night or simply more perceptively dangerous, since darkness makes everything feel like a potential plot twist. Either way, your senses stay sharpened. A sudden laugh echoes from a side alley. It's followed by another voice, then a sharp argument that dissolves into nothing as quickly as it formed. You don't investigate. Rome teaches you early that curiosity after midnight is a luxury usually reserved for people with backup plans. Ahead, the street slopes downward slightly, leading towards a busier district you can hear before you see it. Faint bursts of sound, music, shouting, clinking pottery, rise and fall like waves breaking somewhere just out of sight. The city is not asleep, it is simply rearranged, and you are walking straight into its hidden version. If you want to get lost in more forgotten corners of history, join our village and subscribe.
The noise finds you before the street fully reveals itself. At first, it's just a pulse, bass-like laughter, the clink of clay cups, a burst of argument that rises and collapses too quickly to follow. Then you turn a corner, and the darkness breaks open into a pocket of controlled chaos, an underground tavern district carved into the lower floors of Rome like a second, secret city stacked beneath the first. These places don't advertise. They announce themselves indirectly, by smell, by sound, by the faint glow leaking through shuttered windows. Olive oil smoke, spilled wine, roasted meat that has been cooked long past the point of subtlety. You follow it anyway, because every version of Rome seems to pull you deeper once you stop pretending you're just observing. You descend a narrow stairwell into a cellar tavern. The temperature shifts immediately, warmer, heavier. The air feels lived in, like it has absorbed too many conversations and is now refusing to let them go. Inside, the room is packed. Wooden benches line uneven walls. Lamps hang low, flickering shadows across faces already loosened by drink. A server moves through the crowd carrying a tray of cups filled with watered wine, Rome's favorite compromise between civilization and enthusiasm. Straight wine is considered barbaric, or at least socially suspicious, which is ironic given the current level of shouting. Mainstream historians note that Roman taverns, Capanae and Thermopolia, served as essential social hubs for the lower and working classes, especially in densely packed urban districts where home cooking was limited. This is where Rome's unofficial life happens. Deals, gossip, romance, arguments that begin over nothing and end in philosophical territory nobody asked for. You take a step inside and immediately someone laughs too loudly behind you. A dice game is already in progress at a central table. Knucklebone dice clatter against wood, accompanied by groans and cheers. One man slams his fist down as if personally betrayed by mathematics. Another calmly collects coins with the confidence of someone who has never once doubted probability, even when he should have. Gambling is officially discouraged in Roman law at various points in history, though enforcement tends to be flexible.
Historians still argue whether this reflects genuine moral regulation or simply the state periodically pretending it was surprised by human behavior. You notice a wall fresco behind the bar, painted scenes of exaggerated joy, dancing figures, and one oddly detailed depiction of a drinking contest that looks like it ended in administrative regret. You order a cup of wine.
It arrives immediately, diluted, slightly sour, and served in a chipped clay cup that has clearly seen more history than most emperors. You take a sip anyway. And just like that, the tavern absorbs you. A group at the next table is arguing about military service. One insists legion life is honorable. Another insists it is mostly marching, sweating, and being shouted at by men with more authority than personality. A third man quietly eats olives as though neutrality is a survival strategy. Across the room, a traveling merchant is loudly recounting a journey across the empire. He gestures toward the east, describing distant cities, desert caravans, and markets where spices cost more than gold per weight. Nobody fully believes him, but everyone enjoys the performance. Historians still argue whether Roman tavern storytelling functioned more as entertainment or informal news dissemination in a world without reliable mass communication. Standing here, it feels like both, information and exaggeration sharing the same cup. A musician begins playing near the corner. The melody is simple, repetitive, and slightly off rhythm, but it works because nobody here is sober enough to demand precision. Someone starts singing along, then another. Then a third voice tries to harmonize and immediately regrets the decision. You move deeper into the room. Near the back, conversations grow quieter, more deliberate. Deals happen here. Not illegal necessarily, just unrecorded. A grain shipment arranged, a labor agreement, a message passed through intermediaries. Rome's official economy is vast, but its unofficial one is always humming underneath like a second heartbeat. A soldier sits alone near the wall, helmet beside him, staring into his cup. He looks like someone temporarily between identities, not on duty, not fully off it either. You realize how often Roman life exists in these in-between states, between work and rest, public and private, law and loophole. Someone brushes past you and apologizes lazily. The apology is accepted without sincerity. Outside, through the small window near the ceiling, you can see night still holding the city. But here, inside, time behaves differently. It stretches, it loops, it forgets what hour it is supposed to be. And Rome, in its midnight version, feels less like a capital and more like a collection of overlapping stories told too loudly to end properly.
You leave the tavern eventually, not because anything resolves, but because nothing ever really does inside places like that. The door swings shut behind you with a dull wooden thud that feels almost respectful, like the building is politely declining to comment on what just happened inside. Outside, the air hits colder than you remember. Rome at midnight has a way of resetting itself the moment you step back into it. The warmth, noise, and human pressure vanish, replaced again by distance, long echoing streets and shadows that stretch like spilled ink across stone. You walk uphill this time, away from the denser tavern district. The sounds behind you dissolve quickly, music thinning into suggestion, laughter breaking apart into isolated echoes, dice games becoming nothing more than memory attached to numbers nobody is counting anymore. Oil lamps still mark the streets, but fewer now. Some have already burned down to weak halos. Others flicker as if unsure whether continuing is worth the effort. The city feels more honest in this light, less performance, more structure. A lone watchman patrols ahead, tapping a spear lightly against his boot as he walks. He glances at you once, decides you are not his problem, and continues into the dark. Historians still argue whether Roman night patrols were effective deterrents or mostly symbolic reassurance for citizens who preferred the idea of order more than its consistent application. You pass a small shrine built into a wall alcove. The flame inside it is steady, protected from wind by a carved stone overhang. Someone has left offerings, a few coins, a strip of cloth, a dried sprig of something unidentifiable. Even in the middle of night, devotion continues quietly, without audience. The street opens into a wider intersection where three roads meet. Here, silence feels more noticeable,
almost physical. You become aware of your own breathing again, of footsteps echoing too clearly, of the faint distant rustle of movement that might be wind or might be something else entirely. A stray dog emerges from between buildings. It pauses, looks at you with the calm judgment of something that understands all human activity is temporary. Then it continues on its way. You notice how Rome at night removes scale. Monuments that felt overwhelming during the day are now just darker shapes against darker sky. The grandeur is still there, but it no longer announces itself. It simply exists.
You pass beneath an archway where faint carvings catch what little light remains. Once this structure celebrated a victory, some general returning from a campaign perhaps, or an emperor asserting dominance over a distant region. Now it is just stone, continuing to be stone, while the world moves on beneath it. Mainstream historians note that Roman triumphal architecture was designed to project permanence and power, embedding political memory into the urban landscape. But at night, that certainty softens. Even victory monuments become silhouettes, losing definition at their edges. You walk on. A distant shout breaks the quiet, sharp, brief, and immediately followed by silence again. Not an argument this time, more like a reminder that people are still out here somewhere, living parallel lives in unseen corners of the city. You cross a small square where a fountain trickles steadily. Water sounds unusually loud at night, as if it has finally been given permission to be noticed. The basin reflects a distorted fragment of the sky, dark, clouded, almost without stars due to the haze of city light and smoke. You pause there for a moment, just listening. Rome never fully stops. Even when it quiets, it keeps moving underneath everything, through pipes, through footsteps in distant alleys, through doors opening and closing somewhere out of sight. Historians still argue whether ancient Romans experienced urban loneliness in the modern sense, or whether constant proximity to others prevented it from forming the same way. Standing here, alone in a crowded city that has temporarily hidden its crowd, the distinction feels less important than the sensation itself. You continue forward, and the deeper you go into the sleeping layers of Rome, the more it feels like the city is no longer performing for anyone at all.
The streets narrow again as you drift farther from the faintly busier districts and into residential Rome, if residential is even the right word for a place where homes stack upward like unstable thoughts, and every third doorway seems to belong to someone who is either asleep, working late, or quietly regretting something. Up here, the city feels less like a capital and more like a breathing structure made of wood, stone, and human routine. Oil lamps are scarce now. Instead, darkness dominates, broken only by occasional slivers of light leaking through shutters or curtains. Those thin lines of orange glow suggest life behind walls. Someone still eating, someone still arguing, someone lying awake staring at the ceiling and negotiating with tomorrow. You pass an insula that looks older than the others. Its plaster is cracked in places, revealing rough brick underneath. A faded mural near the entrance shows a protective spirit holding what might be a staff or possibly a cooking utensil. Hard to tell at this stage of Rome's artistic ambition. Mainstream historians note that Roman apartment buildings varied widely in safety and quality, with upper floors often more vulnerable to fire and collapse. Wealth, as always, decided proximity to the ground. Gravity, it turns out, is deeply class-conscious. A faint sound drifts from inside the building. Someone coughing, followed by a lullaby hummed softly, slightly off-key. The intimacy of it feels almost intrusive, like you've overheard something you were not meant to survive emotionally. You keep walking. The street begins to slope downward again, gently this time, guiding you toward a quieter zone where the buildings thin out and the spacing between them grows. The air shifts noticeably, less smoke, more dampness, like the city is slowly exhaling toward something open. You pass a small group gathered around a low table outside a doorway. No shouting here, just quiet conversation and the occasional clink of cups. They don't look up as you pass. Night creates its own etiquette. Acknowledgement is optional. Attention is expensive. A man sits slightly apart from the others, sharpening a small blade with slow, repetitive motions. Not threatening, just practical.
In Rome, maintenance is a philosophy. Historians still argue whether such nightly street gatherings were primarily social, economic, or simply a way for working-class Romans to extend the usable hours of their cramped living conditions. Probably all three. Time in Rome is something people squeeze, stretch, and repurpose whenever possible. You continue downward. The sound of water becomes more distinct. Not the controlled flow of fountains this time, but something broader. The city is approaching the Tiber. As you move closer, the atmosphere changes again. The air grows cooler, heavier, slightly metallic. The streets widen into less dense blocks where warehouses and storage buildings stand.
Like sleeping giants. Here, commerce replaces residence, goods instead of families, movement instead of conversation. A cart creaks somewhere nearby, even at this hour, slowly crossing a distant road, likely delivering or retrieving goods under night conditions to avoid daytime congestion. Rome does not stop transporting itself just because the sun has left. You pass a storage yard where amphorae are stacked in careful geometric clusters. Some are marked with faded symbols indicating origin: oil from Hispania, wine from Gaul, grain from Egypt. The empire briefly visible in clay containers. A stray torch burns near a gate, watched over by a lone worker who seems half asleep but still technically present. He gives no reaction as you pass. Night shifts in Rome are a negotiation between vigilance and survival. Ahead, the sound of the river becomes undeniable. A low, constant rush. You are close now, and something about the air suggests openness, space after so much compression, horizon after so many walls. Rome, for all its density, always ends here at night, at water, at reflection, at something that refuses to be built upon.
The Tiber River appears the way sleep appears after too much noise, sudden, disorienting, and quieter than you expect given everything leading up to it. You step out from the tight grid of streets into a wider riverfront stretch, and the city immediately feels different again. Rome is still there behind you, stacked, layered, breathing, but here it loosens its grip. The buildings pull back slightly from the water's edge, as if even stone understands it should not lean too far into the current. The river moves slowly, but not gently. There is weight in it. Darkness sits on its surface like a second skin, broken occasionally by faint reflections of torchlight from distant bridges or passing guards. The water carries fragments of the city, discarded debris, driftwood, and things you do not try to identify too closely at this hour. Mainstream historians note that the Tiber was both essential and unpredictable to Roman life, used for transport, waste disposal, and trade, while also flooding unpredictably and reshaping parts of the city over time. Rome is, in many ways, built with the river and despite it at the same time. You walk along the riverbank path. The ground here is softer, uneven in places, packed earth mixed with stone. Footsteps sound duller, absorbed by moisture and distance. The air is cooler still, carrying a faint dampness that clings lightly to your skin. A small dock juts into the water ahead. Tide ropes creak quietly as boats shift with the current. One vessel is half covered with a tarp, its outline barely visible in the dark. Another is empty, rocking gently as though waiting for instructions that will not arrive tonight. You hear voices nearby, not loud, not social, transactional. A group of men stands near stacked crates under the dim glow of a single lamp. Their conversation is low and efficient, punctuated by brief pauses that feel more important than the words themselves. Goods change hands. A nod replaces negotiation. Somewhere in the exchange, money moves without ever being fully seen. Rome's official economy sleeps at night. Its unofficial one does not. Historians still argue whether much of Roman trade depended on these informal nighttime exchanges, or whether they were simply a supplement to regulated commerce. Standing here, it feels less like supplement and more like parallel system, one visible by day, one functional by night. You continue past them without being noticed. Further along the river, the city's reflection becomes more fragmented. Ripples distort the lights, breaking them into elongated streaks that shimmer and disappear. It feels like Rome is no longer a solid place here, but a memory being rewritten constantly by moving water. A distant bell sounds from somewhere in the city. Not urgent, just marking time in a place that refuses to acknowledge it properly. You stop near a break in the river wall where stone steps descend toward the water. The steps are worn smooth by centuries of use. You can imagine countless feet standing here before. Merchants, soldiers, travelers, slaves, officials, all looking out at the same moving surface, all briefly suspended between decisions. A breeze moves across the river. It carries with it the mixed scent of mud, wood smoke, and something faintly metallic that might be iron from tools or ships, or something older in the riverbed itself. The smell is not pleasant, but it is honest. Behind you, Rome continues its quiet nocturnal rearrangement. A cart rolls somewhere far off. A voice rises briefly, then disappears. A door closes. Another opens. But here, at the edge, things feel temporarily simplified. Water moving forward. City holding still. You look out across the Tiber as it flows past Rome without asking permission, without acknowledging boundaries, without stopping for anything at all. And for a moment it feels like the river is the only thing in the city that fully understands what time is doing. If you want to get lost in more forgotten corners of history, join our village and subscribe.